Okay, this is a kickoff to assignment 3. And for this assignment, you're going to transform your kind of packed cavity pieces into a landscape and then model the parts to connect them and then repack them. So in this setup, you can see the movement from the kind of packed version, which you already have, and then it's kind of unpacked configuration where all the pieces are organized in a kind of landscape-like configuration. And then the third one, you can't quite see it yet, but you'll see it in a minute. Some more modeling has happened in order to connect the cavities together. So almost like a fountain, or if you were to imagine like pools filling these up and they overflow and fill into each other. And then the final one where they're repacked. So this, you can start to get a sense of the difference. So in this one on the left, all the original kind of cavity figures are intact. And then this one on the right, they start to kind of connect to each other in different places in order to kind of defamiliarize them and produce a different kind of configuration. So you can see that maybe easier in 3D. So this is the original packed one where it's pretty tight. And then this is the initial kind of unpacking and displaying them out in a landscape. And so in these prompts, there's kind of rules or guidelines for you in terms of what you should look for in kind of putting these together. One is to make sure that the bottoms are coplanar, so they're kind of resting on a virtual ground. And that's because we're going to 3D print this. We're going to 3D print two versions of this, one in its packed state and one in its unpacked state. And so if this was a solid 3D model, it would have to be kind of stable and resting on a base. And so you just have to make sure that all that conforms. And then when you put these together, I started to use, corners, edges, bases, and began to interlock them. You can intersect them. So if you wanted to fit a piece, let's just say, for example, you this needed to intersect that for a certain way to key it in, that's fine. You can do that. You just have to modify like Boolean one or the other in order for that to work. We want to minimize stacking. So you can see I've only got the smaller parts are starting to stack on the other ones, as opposed to stacking them and making them kind of precarious, because we want this to be very different from its packed form where they're stacked. You can look at rotating and kind of displacing the orthogonal. That just makes things a little bit more complicated, but that's possible to do as well. But primarily we just want to see a kind of horizontal configuration, whether it fits in a kind of squarish bounding box or it's kind of more linear. That's up to you. But that's pretty much the guidelines for that. And then once you've got that kind of laid out, then the next step is to begin to kind of excavate out to connect the cavities. So you can see, especially in this one, if we go to render view, it's kind of hard to tell the edge of the initial part. So here's that one part, but the excavations have connected it. And so this is what we're looking for, where we don't really read the parts anymore. We read this kind of new landscape that's all interconnected. So hopefully that makes sense. And then I'll do one of these examples to go over how I modeled this. But it's using the same modeling techniques you've already learned in terms of duplicating edges, working with curves, extruding them, and then booleaning out. And then once you've done that and you've excavated, the one thing to mention is, and you'll see it up here, is that it's important, you can't completely excavate the top because we're going to repackage this thing, and so it has to be able to still stand up. So you can see here I've repacked it, and if I were to completely excavate big chunks of this thing where it's no longer stable, then that would produce a problem. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is as you're doing this, you can't remove, like let's say of this part right here, I took out big chunks of this, but I still have a lot of this over here, and a lot of this face, so I know that it's still going to interlock when I bring it back here. But so as you package it, you can see like all the parts and making sure that, yeah, it's still gonna stack and rest. It's okay if there's overhangs, cantilevers, but if you have too many of it, it might collapse as we build it. So this is what we're gonna 3D print, this version, basically 2 copies of each part, and you wanna 3D print each piece independently so you can actually assemble it and put it together, and then the copy of it will display, will get configured in this manner. So this is for assignment 3. Once we have that, then you'll basically be ready to 3D print, and then we're going to move into rendering, where we begin to articulate these surfaces through material shading. All right, so now I'm just going to take a cluster of these and begin to model it. So let's take this right here. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is work on connecting these. So I'm going to use these edge curves, the edge curve here, and connect it to this one here and excavate that. So I'm going to duplicate edges. Let's take this one and that one right there. I know it's hard to see probably, but you should be able to see it now. And actually, let me do this. I'm going to bump up my line weight so we can see this easier. Let's go to 4. Okay, so hopefully you can see the red line better. Okay, so I've got those. Now I'm just going to bring this up and snap it to there, to that level, that plane. And then I'm going to use my arc blend and connect those. Then we join these, mirror them, draw a line from one end. We're just going to close this into a shape. Join, close. So now I'm going to cut this out. I'm going to leave this part. So, you know, you could decide to continue this and excavate this whole thing, but I'm going to leave that little fragment there. And then now I'm going to extrude down to that level. And then with both of these, we boolean that out. And there we go. So now we're starting to connect these guys. And then let's say this piece, to make it look less like a fragment of the other, we might fillet this edge. So I'm going to go to 0.5 radius. There we go. Okay, so the next one is to connect this side here. And so for this, I'm going to draw perpendicular lines matching, let's say, this corner here and this corner here to this corner here. So I'm going to jog them so that they connect. So let's start again by duplicating edge. Okay, so that's what I'm doing. So these are just going to get jogged over. And so let's say proportionally, I'm just going to start by jogging it at the midpoint. And then we can, once we scoop it out or scrape it out, we can modify the face if we want to. Get that up there. Actually, let's split this. Let me split this before I trim it. And I'm just filleting, closing. I'm going to close this shape up. Okay, so now I can extrude, and then we want to find what level we're going to go to. Okay, good. Okay, so this is pretty much basically what you're doing. Doing this kind of work, working off of edges, faces, and extruding them and scooping out. Oh wait, I messed up here. This should be jogged here. So I can fix that by doing that. So when you look at it without any of the edges on, it should be hard to distinguish the original parts. So this should start to look like one large part now. And so it's less about like expression than it is about beginning to remove the legibility of the original figures and combining these to get rid of the legibility of the part itself. So for example, let's say in this case the symmetry is kind of still strong here in terms of how this edge is defined on both sides. I might further change that by filleting this edge. In order so that it responds more locally to this side. And then I would say that this figure is maybe too legible to the original, and in the one that I did over there, I connected these parts. So if we, where is it? Yeah, this one here. If we just go over this a little bit more, you'll start to see the kind of modifications here to begin to open this thing up. So those are the kind of guidelines you should be working with. Is on one hand, you're removing parts of this or areas of this in order to remove legibility or defamiliarize it, as well as connect all the parts into a new assemblage. But you have to maintain enough of it so that it will pack back up into a kind of stable cubic form. And then once you have it all done, then in order to do this, all I did was copy this over and then move, rotate, move snap part by part, and just replace these with these, and then deleted it once they were in place.